All right. Well, Brandon Nakashima is a next-gen finals champion. Carlos Alcaraz is your year-end world number one. The ATP is getting more money, and Novak Djokovic is going to play the Australian Open. Welcome to episode 10 of the Bagels and Breadsticks podcast. I'm Richard.
And I am Logan.
And Logan just heard for the first time that Novak Djokovic will in fact be playing the Australian Open.
An exciting time.
It looks like he will be getting a visa to participate, and his ban will be lifted. That's a big shakeup, really, for the field when you look at the impact that Novak can make, especially being in his mid-30s now. He's still making such a huge impact on the draw.
Yeah.
How much do you think this is going to affect the tides of what's going to happen in Australia?
I think they'll be shaking in their boots again. Okay, because it's no longer going to be the chance of as much of a toss-up as we saw this last year, and I think that's exciting. Yeah. It's good for him because, the Australian Open was sort of his territory for the longest time. And and I'm sure that they're happy to see him back.
Yeah. I feel like the Australian Open with Novak is like a more minute version of what Rafa is with the French Open.
I think
like there was
so.
such a period of dominance where there wasn't really much anyone winning the Australian Open outside of Novak and Roger, essentially. So I think it's going to be really, really interesting to see how much he changes the field. I mean, we know how much of an impact he can make because just of how good he is. We were saying it earlier in the podcast, when you take Novak out of the equation, that opens so many doors, and now you put him back in, and it's closing a lot of them. Yeah. Speaking of Novak, he is our first finalist in this year's ATP Finals,
and he had to work for it, but he got there, and he was undefeated in the round robin, which good for him. And I kind of expected him to be in this finalist position.
Yeah,
but that's not to say that Taylor Fritz and Medvedev especially didn't put up such a defenseless fight against him because Fritz and Djokovic played a really sort of tight tiebreaker in the semis, and Medvedev really ended up pushing him in that last round robin game. I think everyone has probably seen that clip of Djokovic kind of having like this little freak out. But it seems like he did the towel maneuver.
Yeah.
His famous towel maneuver where he sort of sank back into himself and then just came out there and won.
Well, Medvedev played great, and I think
did.
Another great example of the results don't reflect on the player. I mean, Medvedev went 0-3 on the week, but every single match he played was a 3-setter, had at least 2 tie breaks in every single one, and really, really showed that, even though he lost all of his matches, he put up one hell of a fight this past week, and
really did.
Deserves a lot of credit for what he did.
Mm-hmm. No, he didn't. He did not let a lot go. He really drew things out and held points, and I commend him heavily for that.
For sure.
Yeah.
It was really interesting to see last night the match between Rublev and Tsitsipas that granted Rublev now a ticket into the semifinals.
Yes.
I mean, this foursome, let's talk about these 4 guys. I mean, Ruud, Rublev, Djokovic, Fritz, you're semifinalists this year. What do you make of, let's start with Casper Ruud.
Well, I think this is going to kind of tie into my feelings with Fritz being in the final, the semifinal. But we did not expect him to be here. But, honestly, I'm happy that he's there because he, in that first round robin, he started off strong. He got off the ground, and even though he lost the last round robin against Nadal, that was also a really heavy match.
Yep.
I noticed that he was kind of playing to his strengths. He was placing balls really well when he needed to, and I think he earned his place in the semifinals, and I'm excited for him.
Yeah. I mean, if you listen to what we said last week, by the way, go check out that episode because that was a pretty good one where we analyzed what we thought of the group's finals beginning. I think the only one of the 4 that we genuinely expected to be there was Novak.
Yeah.
when you looked at the momentum coming into the tournament, it looked like Felix was gonna do really well, and then it was really surprising to see how well everybody else did. Taylor Fritz got that crucial win over Rafa in the first round, which I remember saying last week.
Yeah,
that win over Rafa gave him the momentum that he needed. Yeah, sure, he lost that next round to Rude, but then he fought back and got Felix in the third.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we were talking about last week. Is that Rude and Fritz kind of needed that Kickstarter game,
and they both got it in the first round.
And they both got it in that first round, which I think is why that they showed up in this semifinals.
Yeah,
100%.
I think what was really interesting to me was when you looked at Casper Ruud, he beat Felix and he beat Fritz. I was expecting for a three-peat, but then Rafa takes him down. I think a nice bookend to Rafa's season, but I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised.
I was as well. I mean, I thought Rafa, he still played some really strong points.
I mean, you can never count him out.
Oh, no, 100%. And I actually thought that we would see Rafa in the semifinals coming into this weekend, but I mean... I was wrong.
I will say, though, Felix took down Rafa in one of, at least scoreline-wise, one of the cleanest matches of the week. 6-3, 6-4. That was really, really interesting to watch Felix as well, because having lost that first round against Casper Ruud, I didn't know what he was going to do the following round, but he came out swinging against Rafa and really, really proved himself. I don't want to say disappointed, but I'm just like, I feel bad for him because after the year he had, I think it's
Felix.
Yeah, Felix. Yeah. I think after the year he's had, it would have been a nice bookend for him to at least make the semifinals. But I think when you look at the week as a whole, the best four made it in.
Yeah,
it always happens that way. Rublev really, really did impress me this week.
He was phenomenal.
Had a really, really awesome performance in his first match against Medvedev. What an absolute brawl.
That was crazy.
It was extremely impressive, especially the comeback. Yeah. When you look at a match that like the first set goes to a tiebreaker, first of all, you know it's going to be good, but also you never know where that match is going to go because it shows you that both guys are on an even playing field somewhat. So
Rublev has shown me in this tournament that he can be an endurance player.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, fighting against Medvedev there, and especially his three-setter against Tsitsipas this last time, he was really having to draw out the mental energy to finish that one up.
Definitely against Medvedev. That's a tall order, and I'm not talking about Medvedev's height. But, it's really difficult when you go up against, especially the two guys that we mentioned, Medvedev and Tsitsipas, both guys with tons of experience being at this level.
And in this specific tournament.
Yeah. It's really impressive to see what Rublev has been able to do. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see where he goes now. I think Ruud versus Rublev is a very interesting combo.
I think so, too. They feel like opposite kind of players, just a little.
Yeah. Both guys really played to their strengths and did exactly what they needed to do to get there. I've mentioned before, Rublev really needing to use that weapon of a forehand that he does have. Being able to set himself up to use that has been crucial, and then when you look at Casper Ruud, the consistency was beyond there.
Oh yeah, 100%. And did you see in that last game versus Tsitsipas, Rublev's returns? He was stepping up and running into the court and using those forehands to just really attack his serves at this extremely unnervingly early time. Yeah, and it was paying off huge. His returns were incredible. I remember.
Yeah. Speaking of returns, that brings me to a point that I was going to make. We forgot to cover it last week, but we're going to cover it now. The Next Gen Finals did happen. I will take blame for that one. But
no, it's okay.
Brandon Nakashima is the first American to ever win the Next Gen Finals. Really exciting, really interesting.
Yeah.
He played phenomenal all week. I was actually looking at the stats, and this is why I mentioned return game. I looked at the stats from all of his matches across the Next Gen Finals, and what I noticed is, compared to his opponent, his return position was much higher and much further into the court than his opponent's, which is really crucial when you look at a good returner. They're moving into the court like Nakashima did, pretty close to the baseline. They're taking time away from their opponent on the return and being way more aggressive. I think really impressive from Nakashima all week. I think it's really awesome to have an American win that tournament. So
Yeah.
what do you think?
I think, well, when I looked last week kind of at where the next gen was at, I was kind of looking at the roster and sort of how the games were going, and I was like, I kind of feel like Nakashima is going to win. And I was happy with that confidence because we've seen him, perform actually very well, this last year and in kind of rising sort of out of this sort of next gen territory. So I think it's a beautiful kind of capstone to that to see him actually like win. And like you said, it's wonderful that he's an American, and it's just cool to see that as well. So I mean, it's expectations and happiness all around from my end.
Yeah, for sure. What I also think was really interesting to see was Musetti did, for lack of better terms, worse than I expected.
I
1 and
know.
2 on the week.
If you asked me like 2 weeks ago, I would have sort of had a lot more confidence in Musetti coming into this tournament because as of late, he's been performing very well, against like the players that we were seeing in the ATP finals, right? And I still have confidence in him for next season. But I mean, after his performance here, I think this is going to be just a teeny bit of a setback for him.
Yeah.
He's got to like sit down and kind of like analyze all these games and sort of think about, I guess how to move on from there.
I will say another name here that definitely did not disappoint me was Jack Draper.
100%, yeah.
We all know how good he has and how good he is and
Yeah.
how much potential he has, and he really showed it, only falling one match in the round robin stage and then losing to Nakashima in the semifinals. I think this is really good for him. I think this will give him some confidence. I'm excited to see what he can do next year because he's a guy with so much potential. This will be really interesting to see how he taps into it.
I remember watching that last game. Wasn't it him versus Musetti that last game? I think that was that was
in the round robin stage.
Yeah. That was an impressive game from Draper. So I mean, I to be honest haven't been paying so much attention to Draper before this tournament, but honestly, watching his performance here was very interesting, and I'm excited to see what else he's gonna do. And like you said, this is a good sign for him in his career.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna go back to our ATP finals. I want to ask you, who do you think is gonna be,
Between
across the net from
Ruud
Novak
and Rublev? I think, if anything, Rublev has the momentum coming into this game. And this is going to be kind of interesting because this game is going to start just a few hours after we're done with this podcast. So we will definitely know later today, which is kind of scary.
We're gonna see if we're gonna be eating our own foot later on, but
I mean, I'm already eating my own foot with how these semifinals turned out. But I mean, it's
that's very true.
Yeah. Oh boy, I don't know. I think I have confidence in Rublev to get through to the final. I mean, it's not that this whole time I have this dramatic lack of confidence in Casper, because that's not the case. I think he's a very talented player, and I think that there's something he could whip out here. It's just like kind of his last game, and also both of their last games, actually. Rublev getting extremely pumped and energized and excited, and then Rublev and then Ruud losing to Nadal in that last game. I don't know. They're both in good form. I think it really just comes out to whether Ruud is able to attack Rublev's aggressive ground strokes, as much as because that's where the game lies.
That's exactly what I was going to say.
Yeah.
For me, this game is not going to be dependent on what Rublev does. Rublev's going to do what he does best. He's going to be very aggressive. He's going to push it, and he's going to use that forehand to the best of his ability. The question for me is, will Ruud be able to respond appropriately? There's two ways he could go about this. I think it's going to depend. The one thing that does depend on Rublev is where he's at mentally. Because I think Ruud can play this one of two ways. He can be a bit more conservative, overly consistent, really frustrate Rublev, but I think the more kind of effective approach is going to be to attack and be aggressive.
I think 100%. It's about him sort of coming on top of those really fast ground strokes, because I think maybe this is a part of Rude's movement as a player, but I think, and we discussed this about how we feel like he kind of needs to like figure out moving into the court when he's hitting these shots to sort of stay on top of some of them, and that kind of becomes this deciding factor for him.
Yeah.
You know, getting out of that sort of more conservative territory and into this more aggressive territory, which we've seen him perform well in. So I think we're gonna kind of, and he's not. I would say, a player to have sort of a dramatic Djokovic tier reset, after the first set. So I feel like the first set is going to be pretty reflective of the kind of game we're going to have from them. But like you said, it's a game of Rude.
Yeah,
I think.
But I think regardless of who goes forward, I do think Novak's going to win again. But
I think so too.
But you never know.
No, yeah. I think if anything, seeing him kind of come out of that game versus Medvedev was kind of crazy to me, because you pin him as a character of endurance, and kind of see him kind of go through those like motions was so foreign. You know what I mean? Like I was like wow, he's really in kind of a different realm than he normally is, one that's not defined by calmness or like hyper athleticism, although he hasn't lost his athleticism. It's just I feel like that there's something there that we haven't seen before, and it's kind of this level of distress, in trying to sort of stay afloat in that particular game. Yeah. So I'm wondering if we'll see that again in the finals, but I'm not so sure, and I do have confidence that he will win.
Yeah, no, I agree. Moving on, the next thing that we're going to hit here, we have our ATP year-end world number one. Mm-hmm. And it is Carlos Alcaraz, the youngest year-end world number one in ATP history. I want to ask you this. You look at our 2-year year-end world number ones, Iga, Carlos. Mm-hmm. Do we think these two are a good representation of what this year has been, and why?
Okay, interesting. That's an interesting question. Yeah. I think yes, on both ends, but for like completely different reasons.
Yeah.
Because for Iga, it's reflective of her progress and sort of, us seeing the WTA become not necessarily structured, but sort of more aligned into this sort of region where she's number one. and that makes sense that she's there, right? Whereas with Alcaraz, he is a talented player. And he has earned his spot to be number one this year. But you could have also probably put him in a toss-up with like a couple other players.
That's true.
So at least kind of, I think that is appropriate, if only in its reflection of sort of like where the ATP is right now. Obviously, since it's not Djokovic, who else is it? And it just is Alcaraz, Although I do think that coming into next year, I think we're going to sort of see him sort of post this year earn that spot a little more, I think, because...
he just came into it a few,
exactly.
2 months ago?
Yeah, this is extremely new, and he was, of course, not able to participate in the ATP finals, so we wouldn't have sort of seen sort of the culmination of this quite yet. But I think, if anything, I think it's appropriate on both ends, just sort of as reflection of how each individual... the WTA and the ATP did sort of this year.
Yeah.
I think it makes sense.
I'm going to agree with you, and in the interest of not sounding repetitive, I'm going to just build off of what you said.
Yes.
I think when it comes to Carlos, what's going to be interesting for me next year is you look at the way Iga handled becoming world number one. She inherited world number one in a very odd way due to Ash Barty's retirement, and then from there, she started going on an absolute tear. And really, I feel like she felt that she needed to kind of earn that spot and really solidify herself, and she definitely did that. I think what's going to be interesting now is Carlos did, I don't want to, not to discredit, I'm going to say he earned, per se, or, he got there based off of surpassing other people, rather than just being in the number 2 spot and inheriting it.
Yeah. I know what you said.
I think with Iga, she took that number 1 spot and really fought and justified it. What's gonna be interesting is can Carlos do the same thing? He's going to start the year at the number one spot. How is he going to handle that pressure and that expectation of being number one? And now to speak on, like, is it representative? I definitely think it is. And I think what I want to touch on is the fact that we need to look at these two and look at how old they are. They are both very, very young.
Oh, yeah.
I think it's really, really amazing when we look at how old, how young these guys are. And it's really, really nice to see the next gen taking over. I mean, Carlos is 19
Younger
and
than
Iga's
me.
21.
A year older than
I
me.
mean, they're around our age,
Yeah.
and that's really, really awesome to see.
Wow.
It's really important, I think, that we have these two really young year-end world number ones because we've had such a long period of time where they were older, and it was kind of like the generation of players that we grew up with, especially on the men's side when you look at the big three. But I think when you look at these two, they're a good representation of the next wave of players coming in.
Oh, yeah.
100%.
100%.
For that reason, I'm glad it's not Novak or Rafa. I'm glad that it's someone like Alcaraz who this year
Well, it
has
shows
been
that the
a
sport
really
is
awesome.
evolving,
Yeah,
you know?
it's been a really awesome breakout year for him between his first Masters 1000 and his first Grand Slam. It's been a really, really good year for that younger generation between Ruud and Fritz and Felix and Alcaraz. And you look at the field that went to the tour finals this year, and it's pretty young. And that's really awesome to see because for such a long time, it's been a question of, will the next gen be able to break in? Will they be able to handle the big three? When will the big three head out? And, how will that alter things? So long have we been saying that, oh, this would have been different without the big three. But now we're starting to see the next gen take over. And the only real genuine threat to the next gen progressing is Novak. Rafa his time will come, and it's very soon compared to Novak. Not to say he's any less of a player. I mean, he's still one of the greatest of all time, and he's still performing to amazing capabilities. You saw it against Rublev a few days ago. But I think when you look at, Alcaraz and Ruud and Fritz, and you look at these really young guys, and it's like, this is kind of like what we were waiting for.
Yeah.
This is honestly what we expected from the team Tsitsipas, Medvedev era, Zverev era. We kind of expected them to... I mean, they performed really, really well and did really well against the big three, but when they were the same age as like a Ruud or an Alcaraz or whatever...
They were still kind of struggling to emerge just a little.
But the expectation for them, by the age they are now, was that they would have all at least had one.
Yeah.
And only two of them do. Medvedev and team.
Yeah.
And you look at when they were, 19, 20, 21 coming up, what did we expect from them when they were 25, 26, 27? At least one. But it's been all Novak, Rafa, and Roger. So I think it's going to be really cool to see. They're coming at a good time where the big three is still here, but they're slowly backing out and they're slowly coming down.
Yeah.
Which gives them really, really awesome experience against these guys. But also, when they are 25, 26, 27, they're going to be the ones competing for all these titles. And it's going to be really cool to see what happens.
I think 100% is like you were saying, sort of facing them at the back end of their careers and sort of like using that as like a starting point. And then kind of like evolving into this future where they're the ones, that we'll be talking about sort of as this force that the big three currently is.
Yeah. And so the last thing we're going to hit this week is there has been a massive prize money increase for 2023.
Yes, there has.
The ATP this past I believe it was Thursday announced a record $37.5 million prize money increase for next year. This will put between the ATP Tour and the ATP Challenger Tour, that will put the money at a all-time record of $217.9 million. So $18.6 million will go towards on-site prize money. Bonus pools for top in the top 30 will increase by 9.8 million, and prize money on the Challenger Tour, on that very, very crucial Challenger Tour, for up and coming, aspiring players, will increase by 9 million. What do you think? First thoughts.
I think. Oh, I don't know. I don't know how much of an incentive money is for some of these players, but I can imagine that this is gonna make things a little more interesting, and maybe just a little more intense if the stakes are kind of raised. But it's also kind of about, I guess, compensating players who don't, aren't so like first and second. You know what I mean? Kind of making sure that like, I guess more tennis players get more money, and I think that's very interesting, because I don't think I've ever sat down and thought about, okay, who here definitely like needs this prize pool money. I've always kind of thought about it as like the prize was like the ATP points. You know what I'm saying? But I think it's nice and interesting that they're adding this money, especially sort of dividing it, kind of like you were saying, into the bonus pools and the Challenger Tour prize money sort of as well. I can't expect like something so monumental of a difference, but it's very nice of them.
Yeah. What I think this is really bringing up
I could be wrong.
for this episode is going to be the conversation about how difficult it is to make money as a professional tennis player.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you look at this number of money, I think it's really, really important, because you look at how much players net off of, prize money and stuff like that, and it's not that much. And it's interesting that you bring up the prize being points. And there's a reason why that's so valued as well, is because when you get higher up in the rankings and you become more of a name, that's when the money that you actually really get to keep starts rolling in, and that's going to be your sponsors. You look at, for example, Roger Federer. Roger, most of his income is sponsorships, not even his prize money. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if he made more money off of sponsorships in his entire career of playing.
Yeah, and like advertising and stuff too.
What's really important is this money is going to do a lot of good. It's really needed, in my opinion, because a lot of people can't afford to continue playing seriously, just because of not being able to afford it. I mean, look
tennis
at guys.
Is an expensive sport.
You look at guys outside of the top 100 and what they're making off of their tournaments. Sometimes they're not, most of the time they're breaking even. Sometimes they're not even breaking even, because if you look between the price for the plane ticket, the hotel fee, the entry fee into the tournament, you're looking at a lot of expenses, let alone if you have a traveling team. Forget about it. If you have a coach, if you have a physio, if you look, most of the smaller players don't have big teams, except for unless those are like friends or family.
Yeah.
You look at the bigger guys, the higher ranked guys, and you look in their box and they have the coach, the physio, the trainer, the agent. They have these big teams because they can afford it, because of not only the prize money, but more importantly, the advertisements and
their marketability.
Exactly, and that money that they bring in from their partnerships. So I think it's really important to realize that these are people, and when you bring in more money, it does allow the tour to grow a lot.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's exactly kind of like what I was saying. It's just like, it's not for the people who sort of like win as much, for the people who place top in sort of the higher level tournaments, people we see all the time. Chances are, if you like ask somebody who a player is, and if they know who they are, then they're a marketable player, right? And then they won't need this as much. So I think that money will be best used, like you were saying, for the players who kind of aren't there yet.
Now
And that's exciting.
Now this increased budget this $37.5 million does not include Grand Slam prize money and the 2022 canceled events. But I mentioned that because I want to mention the Grand Slams. When you look at the prize money offered at the Grand Slams, even losing in the first round for somebody ranked outside the top 100, that's a significant chunk of money that can keep them going. I mean, a first round bow out in Grand Slam singles is tens of thousands of dollars. I think it's I want to look it up, but I think you get what I mean. Like it's
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
it's so much more. Like a first round bow out at the U.S. Open probably pays more than a lot of those Challenger and ITF Tour level events, which allows players to continue to play and continue tennis as a way of life. You know?
Oh yeah, 100%. And I think that's such a good thing. Kind of the prospect that those smaller tournaments are going to sort of have more at their disposal now.
Oh my gosh.
What?
A first round bow out at the U.S. Open is $80,000.
Damn.
That's more than a lot of Challenger Tour events.
I should go into the U.S. Open and lose first round.
Yeah, but
Oopsies.
but I mean, it's really really interesting. And then you look at taxes and how much that takes away from prize money. You have guys. I mean, the reason why, for example, Novak lives in Monaco. There's a reason that a lot of players live in Monaco is because of the low tax rates, because they actually get to keep a decent amount of their prize money.
Yeah.
Especially when
point.
you have a family, it's really hard to play tennis seriously for a living. I mean, you look at pro players who have families. You look at Serena Williams. You look at Novak. You look at Rafa. You look at Roger. You look at Andy Murray. And these guys are able to do it because they have the money to, because they were super famous, and we mention them because they're household names. We know who they are.
Yeah, exactly.
A lot of tennis fans know who they are. And again, that goes back to marketability. So I think this increase is going to be really good for the tour. It's going to be interesting for me to see how much this really ends up really benefiting players. I think it will a lot. But it's going to be really interesting.
Hopefully, at least by the shred of a decimal, they'll be able to kind of reduce sort of the fortune it takes. You know what I mean? Because, I mean, we talk about, like, some tennis players' sort of stories coming into becoming professional tennis players, and there's a lot of luck, you know, thrown in there because of how expensive, you know, tennis as a sport is, you know, and it's, and I remember us sort of talking about this when we were talking about Francis a little while ago, and sort of how the prospect of thinking about some players who are really talented but just don't get sort of the financial compensation that they need to keep going, you know, and so it's exciting, you know, that.
Yeah. I definitely agree with you. It's going to be really interesting to see where things go. And I don't want to go too far into it because I think we need to save some stuff for the year end, but it's going to be really interesting. We'll come back to you guys next week with an ATP Finals champion and potentially more. We'll see what happens.
Yes. It's going to be an exciting next episode. Yeah. I'm nervous. I'm nervous and excited. I'm probably going to eat my own shoes. We'll see how all this beeswax turns out.
Yeah. Thanks for listening, guys.
All right, goodbye.